Path of Exile 2 is adding Runeforging to the game in patch 0.5, and this is essentially a new crafting mechanic that's being added as part of the Runes of Alder League mechanic, and you'll be able to spend this new currency item here, it's called Verisium, that you get from the encounters, and you'll essentially be able to add a new defensive type Runic Ward to your gear. So we get this example here from the reveal stream, where Runic Ward is being added to a helmet. And in the early game, you'll be able to just add Runic Ward to your items, and there'll be basically no trade-off going on there. You just get Runic Ward for free. Runic Ward is a new defensive type which goes below your health bar, so if you actually get into the scenario where you lose all of your health and you have Runic Ward, the damage will then be taken from Runic Ward after that. So it's basically a bit of a kind of cheat death style mechanic, but it doesn't really work like that. It just works as another sort of pool of life. If you lose all of that pool of Runic Ward after your life is on 0, you'll then die. So it's kind of an interesting defensive mechanic that they want to play around with. They're also introducing the new skills there that interact with Runic Ward. But I wanted to do a few videos where I discussed Runeforging a little bit in terms of unique items, because there's something extra going on there in this patch, and that is that you'll be able to Runeforge uniques, and they'll have some different outcomes based on their item level. So for example, right here we have the Black Braid Unique Body Armour. Now this is usually an item which is typically unusable in the endgame because it just has such a low amount of base armour. I think it's around 120 or something like that on the normal item. And you can see on the Runeforged version, you have about 400 armour there, so it's quite a lot better. Still probably not usable, but this is just an example of what Runeforging is going to do. But this is not always going to be the case. It won't always have this kind of exact outcome where it boosts the base defenses and adds Runic Ward, because we actually get some other examples here. Here is a Brass Dome, and this is a much higher level item. It provides a huge amount of armor, and we can see when they actually put this item into the Runeforging bench, it removes all of the armor and instead applies a huge amount of Runic Ward. So that's a decision you're making there, a huge trade-off. You will actually be able to hover over the right panel whenever you put an item into the Runeforging bench to see what it's going to do before you actually confirm and forge it. So that means you're never going to get into a scenario where you basically end up with something that you didn't want, because you can always check exactly what it's going to do. However, in the patch notes, we actually got a little bit more information about this, and this is this patch note right here, which says, after unlocking Unique Verisium Runeforging in Act 3, you can upgrade the base types of unique items for weapons and armors that drop at levels lower than 55. Upgraded unique weapons will have higher damage, and upgraded armors will have increased base defenses as well as Runic Ward. So this is to allow them to be more competitive at higher levels. So basically that's just for low level uniques, anything below the drop level of 55. Then at 55 and above, there'll begin to be trade-offs there. It says here you can still use Runeforging on those items, but it will modify their defenses to include Runic Ward at the cost of potentially reducing their other defenses. So we saw that there with the Brass Dome being the extreme example where it completely removes the defenses. But Mark in the Q&A talked about how, some item types will remove maybe half of the defenses to provide a lot of Runic Ward. Some will remove maybe 20% or 30% of it, and you'll get varying levels of Runic Ward. It will mean that in the end game, you'll be able to kind of prioritize which base types you actually want to use, because you already know how the Runeforging bench is going to interact with them. However, some uniques have very specific outcomes. So, in this reveal stream, aside from the Brass Dome that was showcased there as kind of the extreme outcome for Runic Ward, one of the other examples that was showcased was a helmet, which is Radiant Grief. Now, this is a low-level unique. It has a drop level lower than 55, but the evasion rating does not get increased, as it says in the patch notes there, right? In the patch notes, it tells us that the base defenses will be boosted when you're using it on items lower level than 55, with a drop level there. But right here, this isn't being increased. The evasion rating is the same. It is still adding Runic Ward, but Mark says in the reveal here that this modifier right here, the 45% increased Ignite Magnitude, that is what's being added by the Runeforging bench, and he says that some uniques do have this property where instead of kind of having their defenses boosted, they will gain an extra modifier instead. Now right now we have no idea which items are going to do that and which ones are going to just do the kind of basic defense boosting, but I wanted to kind of go over some examples of items that I think will be potentially really powerful in the upcoming patch, and in this video we're going to begin with body armors. So first of all, we have Wandering Reliquary. Now this is a body armor which I actually talked about a little bit in the last patch, because they made a change, and this actually hasn't been updated here on the wiki, but they made a change where block actually does count as prevented damage for the purpose of this modifier right here. So it says 50% of physical damage prevented recoups as life. If you block physical damage, half of all of that blocked damage there will be recouped as life. So this is actually quite powerful. You can go back and check the video that I made. You can get thousands and thousands of recoup per second by utilizing block and this item, and you can also use, other items that provide similar stats there. But I wanted to mention this one in regards to the whole Runeforging thing, because this item has really bad base armor. We already know that the base types are being boosted a little bit there to provide more defenses for armor and evasion, so this will be one of them. So this will already have higher armor just as a baseline in the new patch. But then when being Runeforged, it should also have even more. So if this can provide, something around 1,000 armor or more, this is going to actually be quite a good body armor at that point if you use it with block. Because, of course, any other hits that actually get through your block are still going to be, doing damage to you. And if you have a decent amount of armor there and it's dealing physical damage, you can then also mitigate that, and that will further contribute to your prevented damage for the purpose of recoup. So, this item could be quite good if it has a bit more armor. Next up, there's the Queen of the Forest. Again, an item which just falls below that level requirement. And this item is really interesting because if it ends up getting quite a good amount of evasion, let's say it provides 2,000 evasion or something like that, this one has a pretty interesting interaction there with your boot slot where, you no longer gain movement speed from any other modifiers because you're kind of all in on evasion scaling, and therefore your boot slot gets kind of freed up in a way because you don't need a movement speed modifier from it. That way you could look at kind of interesting options there for other unique boots, which I will be doing a video on boots at some point. But it also just means, generally speaking, you can craft boots. You want to get a bunch of evasion, for example, so you could craft boots with the full focus on evasion because you don't need that movement speed prefix, which means you can then have another modifier which benefits you defensively, like an extra evasion boosting modifier there, or maybe a good life roll or something like that. So this one does have a lot of potential, and also worth mentioning there is the buffed deflection in patch 0.5. So, if you're going to be investing a huge amount into evasion, you're also going to be going into deflection there and kind of splashing your evasion a little bit so you're getting more out of it. And with the new deflection calculation, you are going to be able to reach a lot higher chance to actually deflect hits. So keep an eye on Queen of the Forest. I think this one has a lot of potential in the upcoming patch. Now, the next two items here are ones that I'm kind of thinking they probably will still not be good enough, but I want to mention them anyway, especially Bitterbloom here, which has 50% increased energy shield recharge rate, and it has a method to force recharge to start. Whenever you actually use a mana flask, it will force the recharge to begin, and that is kind of very good in regards to the energy shield recovery nerfs that we had in this patch. Because both the energy shield recharge modifiers and the faster start recharge modifiers were nerfed significantly. So if you have a boosted recharge rate and a way to actually force your recharge whenever you actually, take a substantial amount of damage, that is potentially quite good. The problem with this item, of course, is that it provides such a low amount of energy shield. Now, we do know that energy shield is going to be improved a little bit at lower levels. There's nothing changing at the higher levels, but at the lower levels, it is improving a little bit. So this will be higher baseline in the new patch, and then potentially with Runeforging, it's going to be quite a lot higher. If this item can provide somewhere around 500 or, around their energy shield, I think you could consider using it, because it's one of those things where even though you'll have a lower amount of energy shield in total, having the ability to actually recover your energy shield on command by using a mana flask is really quite strong. And another thing that I want to talk about there is the Blacked Out, which is another body armor there, another kind of low base energy shield body armor. This one is really interesting when combined with the Lich, right, with the Eternal Life node there, because it has this modifier right here, damage over time bypasses your energy shield. Well, if you have Eternal Life on the Lich, that means that you are completely immune to damage over time, because all of that damage over time bypasses your energy shield, and then your life cannot change because you still have energy shield. And so, damage over time, completely immune to every form of it in the game. And that, once again, is extremely strong when you consider the nerfs to energy shield recovery in the upcoming patch, because damage over time is one of the biggest problems when it comes to energy shield recovery. You have a lot of lingering damage over time, things that are stacking up on the ground, for example, or debuffs like, bleeding and ignite and things like that. So if you can ignore the damage over time effects, that means that you'll be able to immediately, progress to getting that delay recharge to actually start, and that way you can start to actually recover after taking a hit of damage. But once again, just like the previous item there, the Bitterbloom, with the Blacked Out, it's all going to come down to how much energy shield you can actually get. Once again, it's going to be boosted baseline a little bit, and then how much is the Runeforging bench actually going to give you? We'll have to wait and see. I do want to mention the Cloak of Flame there, because, this is an item that's already very good, but if you can get a decent amount of energy shield at the same time, this is going to be just an exceptionally good body armor. It may actually make it so you can use it in kind of a more energy shield or hybrid focused build. However, I will mention that the change to bleeding in this patch is going to make this modifier slightly weaker, only a little bit, but basically bleeding in the new patch, whenever it's inflicted on you by a monster, you won't actually take extra damage while you're moving, which is a big deal because it deals double damage while you're moving, and it won't do that anymore. It will only work like that on monsters. So this modifier, which works for all physical damage, not just hits, is slightly nerfed by that change because bleeding is a little bit less threatening, but Cloak of Flame still one to look out for in the next patch. Then we have the Convenant, which is kind of an interesting life energy shield hybrid body armor there. Again, this is an item which could be quite good if it provides a decent amount of energy shield. This one provides much more energy shield than the previous items we were looking at there, but it's still nowhere near a crafted body armor. It does grant a good amount of life, but the main reason why I wanted to mention this one is because it has a huge stat there for spell damage leached as life, 10%, and with the upcoming leech changes in 0.5, you're going to want to focus on getting a good amount of percentage of your damage leached, rather than, scaling your damage when it comes to recovery from leech. So this is a really strong modifier. This kind of got indirectly buffed by those changes to leech, and this item might be interesting to look at just depending on how it comes out of the Runeforging bench. Next up, we've got Widow's Reign. Now, this item is kind of interesting to me because I really like Dissolution of the Flesh in Path of Exile 1, which has this modifier right here. The only difference being in PoE 1, this is 2 seconds instead of 3. But how this item works is this modifier basically changes how the life loss from taking damage actually interacts with your life. Instead of kind of losing life and then being able to recover it normally, that damage is reserved against your life pool, and then once you take no damage to life for 3 seconds, the reservation is entirely removed. Now, this item, as it currently stands, is pretty much useless in PoE 2. It doesn't have very good armor or evasion rating. It has some decent stats here, a good amount of life there. There's chaos resistance roll, ailment threshold, these things are decent. But because you can't really get very much life, and because there's not a lot of interacting mechanics with it, this just isn't very good as it is right now. But in the new patch, we have Runic Ward coming into the game, and Runic Ward has a lot of potential with this item, because if you reserve your entire life pool, you can no longer take damage to your life. Therefore, the 3 second timer starts right then and there, and you can't take any more damage to your life, and you can still take damage to Runic Ward. But the damage that you take to Runic Ward will not count as taking damage to life, and therefore you'll be able to buy the time you need to actually unreserve your life pool, and if you can survive for those few seconds, then all of your life will be unreserved after that time. The kind of interaction going on here really depends on how much Runic Ward you'll actually be able to get in the game. We don't really know that, and we don't know how a lot of these uniques are going to kind of interact with the Runeforging bench in terms of how much you're going to get, but this is a really interesting one to look out for. I really want to play around with this one in the new patch. Then we have the Mutable Star. Now, this item has incredibly good modifiers. This is one of those interesting uniques where it's like completely overlooked because of the base stats on the item, but the actual item itself has really, really strong modifiers, especially after the nerf to Energy Shield Recharge in the upcoming patch. Look at this modifier right here, 50 to 100% increased Energy Shield Recharge rate. That is a crazy modifier considering the circumstances, and that is potentially very, very useful if this item comes out of the Runeforging bench in a good state. We do already know that Armor and Energy Shield is kind of on their radar for buffs in this patch. Mark talks about how it is one of the worst performing defensive archetypes, So a lot of the items, low-level items are going to be buffed already in this patch without the Runeforging bench. And I could expect this providing, maybe 1,000 or 1,200 armor and then a lot more energy shield, maybe 300 or 350 energy shield. And at that point, this item is going to be really good because it doesn't just have this stat here. It has a bunch of useful stats. This reduced duration of bleeding on you is good. Reduced ignite duration on you, that's good as well. There's also this one here, defend against hits as though you had 1% more armor per 1% current energy shield. You just get even more defense. Like, you don't really have to lean into this too much. That's just a modifier to boost up your armor. So this item, definitely something to look out for kind of a hybrid energy shield approach there. Then we have Waveshaper, which I think is actually going to be used a lot in the next patch. Even if this couldn't be Runeforged, if it was just used on its own, I think this is going to be a really good pickup, especially early on in the league in the first few days, because this modifier right here allows you to kind of bypass the nerfs to energy shield recharge by scaling your mana regeneration rate instead. So this makes it just a really kind of comfortable item for those early maps when you get through the campaign and get to mapping. But with Runeforging, it might provide a good amount of armor and especially energy shield, because this kind of adds a bunch of energy shield here. This is a hybrid body armor, so once again it's going to have those buffs coming in, and this won't be quite as much of a buff because this is a slightly higher level item, but then we'll have to see exactly what the Runeforging bench is going to do. This is definitely a good item to use early on in the league. Next we have the Couture of Crimson, which is already a good item. It was a good item last patch after they, changed the reduce life modifier to be increase life instead. And even with the leech changes there, this is still going to be a very useful modifier so that you can overflow your maximum life from your life leech. And once again, this is another armor and energy shield body armor. So, hopefully this is going to provide a lot more base defenses, and this item will actually be quite a bit more usable in the new patch. And then we have Redflare Conduit, which, this item was actually used in the last patch only because of this Val Cultivation modifier here, the gain a power charge every second if you haven't lost power charges recently. You can use this one here along with Resonance so that this modifier provides you with endurance charges instead, and therefore you can never lose power charges, and you never kind of interact with this modifier here where you get shocked or anything like that because you never actually reach maximum power charges. And so this is actually quite a good item in terms of charge generation, but the item itself, like, the extra stats here, the mana, the lightning resistance, the base defenses, it is absolutely terrible, right? Really, really not good at all. So if the Runeforging bench can make this significantly better, this is definitely an item to look out for. And lastly, I want to mention two items here. We have Pragmatism and Perfidy. Now, the reason why I want to mention these two items together is because even though they have a required level of 52 here on Pragmatism and 45 on Perfidy, the patch notes specifically mention the drop level. It says items that drop at levels lower than 55. Now, both of these items are boss drops. They actually only drop from bosses. You can't drop them anywhere else in the game. The Pragmatism body armor drops from the King in the Mist, and Perfidy drops from Simulacrum, and both of those area levels are much, much higher than that 55 prerequisite. So we don't really know how exactly that's going to interact. It could be the case that the patch notes here isn't really telling the truth. It might not be, items that actually drop at that level. It might just be based on the required level, or it could be literally based on the drop level. If it is based on the drop level, it's going to be a bit awkward because most items in the game, when it comes to uniques, are dropping based on their required level, but some have hidden restrictions. You can see that in PoE 1, for example, with Mage Blood, where it has like a hidden drop level restriction. It's not tied to the level that you actually require to equip that item. So it could be the case where we have some items that require a low level, but they're boss drops, and therefore they drop at a higher level, so they might not interact with the Runeforging bench in that way. But I will just briefly mention these two because Pragmatism, there's some shenanigans you can do there with charms where they don't use any charges, so you can kind of make builds up where you constantly use your charms. And there is, of course, the addition of Mage Blood in this patch. We have no idea what it does just yet, but a lot of people are speculating that it will have something to do with charms. So this is definitely one to look out for in that regard. And Perfidy, already quite a good body armor, has quite a lot of armor and evasion for a unique item that is. And these modifiers right here, they're actually pretty good. They're not very reliable, right? You have a 10 to 30% chance to avoid all of these different damage types from hits. But over the course of a map or something like that, this is actually going to provide a lot of extra damage mitigation with lots of hits coming in. It also grants you Intimidate, which is a really good debuff in PoE 2. This makes enemies take 10% increased damage and deal 10% reduced damage. And this item could provide a lot more defenses, right? If you can put it in the Runeforging bench, and it kind of gets that lower level item buff. If this provides something like 1500 or, 1600 armor and evasion, this one is definitely going to be a really good body armor. But overall, I am really excited to see how these unique items actually interact with Runeforging in the upcoming patch, because there's a lot of potential there for a lot of these uniques. There always has been ever since the launch of Path of Exile 2, and it's kind of an ongoing meme where, unique items are added to the game, but they're just really, really bad in terms of their basic stats. They always have these kind of build-defining or, build-around modifiers or things that are really, really quite good on their own, but when you compare them to a lot of crafted items and, other items in the game, like higher-level uniques, they kind of pale in comparison. They're just not good enough. So I'm excited to see if the Runeforging bench is actually going to make some of these items usable in the upcoming patch. But that's going to be it for this video. I will be doing a few more videos on other unique slots, because we know that this is going to work for all armors and weapons. So this was just body armors. There's also, helmets, gloves, boots, and weapons. And I'll be doing more videos on those in the upcoming days. But thanks for watching this video. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.